This is John Bunn, a man who lost 27 years of his life to a murder conviction for a crime he did not commit.
I'm an innocent man, Your Honor, and I have always been an innocent man.
At the time, Bunn was living in Brooklyn, New York, and was only 14 years old when he was arrested. The case against him was handled by NYPD Detective Louis Scarcella, an officer later linked to multiple wrongful convictions. Bunn spent 16 years in prison and another 11 years on parole, all while maintaining his innocence and continuing to fight to clear his name. Years later, his conviction was overturned after serious misconduct was uncovered, including the lack of probable cause for his arrest and flaws in the investigation itself.
I want y'all to know that y'all convicted and had a wrong man in prison.
After nearly 3 decades labeled as a murderer, John Bunn was finally exonerated.
I want to say thank you, Your Honor, because in 27 years, I've been fighting for my life.
But before he leaves the courtroom, he has a moment with the judge. His case became one of several that exposed deep failures within the system. Following his release, Bunn filed a lawsuit against the city of New York, seeking accountability for the years that were taken from him. This is David Ronta. He spent 23 years behind bars for a murder he did not commit in Brooklyn, New York. In February 1990, Rabbi Chaskell Wurzburger was shot and killed in Williamsburg during a botched robbery attempt. Ronta was arrested by Detective Louis Scarcella and later convicted of second-degree murder, even though no physical evidence tied him to the crime. His conviction relied heavily on witness testimony and a disputed statement he was said to have signed. Decades later, the Conviction Integrity Unit of the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office reviewed the case and uncovered serious problems. A key eyewitness admitted that a detective had coached him to pick Ronta in a police lineup. Investigators also found that some testimony came from jailhouse informants who were allowed to leave detention, use drugs, and visit prostitutes, allegedly in exchange for implicating him. Many witnesses later recanted or admitted they were pressured. In March 2013, a judge vacated Ronta's conviction and dismissed the charges.
Mr. Brandt, to say that I'm sorry for what you have endured would be an understatement and grossly inadequate, but I say it to you anyway. The defendant's motion to vacate the judgment of conviction is granted.
After having his handcuffs removed, Ronta hugged his family and walked out a free man. Following his release, he reportedly received $2 million from the state and a $6.4 million settlement from the city of New York. Ronta's case was one of the first high-profile wrongful convictions tied to Detective Louis Scarcella, whose work has since been scrutinized in multiple cases. This is Susan Mellon. She was sent to life in prison without parole because of false testimony. She was 42 years old when she was arrested in Los Angeles, California, at a McDonald's while taking her daughter to get a Happy Meal. That was the last time she saw her child for 7 years.
You are under arrest now for murder.
Believing I wouldn't do that.
Susan was accused of killing her ex-boyfriend, Richard Daly. Her conviction was based only on the word of one informant, who said Susan had confessed to the crime. There was no physical evidence linking her to the murder. For 17 years, Susan stayed in prison. She missed her family and her children, but she never gave up hope. Later, her case was re-examined. Investigators found out that the key witness was a pathological liar and had lied in her testimony. Other evidence showed that the real suspects had been ignored. Some witnesses even changed their story and said Susan was innocent. In October 2014, the court finally cleared her. Her conviction was thrown out, the charges were dropped, and she was declared factually innocent.
The judgment is vacated, the conviction is overturned, and as to Ms. Mellon, the case is dismissed.
When she left prison, she was reunited with her daughter. One of their first stops together was back to McDonald's to finally enjoy that long-awaited Happy Meal. The state of California gave Susan $597,200 for the years she lost, and the Los Angeles City Council later paid her $12 million in a settlement. Susan Mellon's story reminds us how dangerous false testimony can be and how strong a person must be to fight for justice. This is Deborah Milkey. She spent 22 years on death row for a murder she did not commit in Phoenix, Arizona.
My innocence did not matter in their pursuit of a conviction.
In December 1989, Deborah's 4-year-old son, Christopher, was found shot to death in the desert near Phoenix. Police opened an investigation and soon focused on Deborah. Detective Armando Saldate Jr. questioned her, but the interrogation was never recorded. There was no audio, no tape, no video, just the detective's later claims. Saldate said Deborah confessed to arranging her son's murder and told officers details about what would happen next.
She then decided that it'd be best for Christopher Mielke to die.
At trial, there was no physical evidence linking Deborah to the crime, no gun, no fingerprints, no DNA, and no written confession. The only direct evidence was what the detective said he heard. Despite this, Deborah was charged with first-degree murder, convicted, and sentenced to death. She was sent to Arizona's death row, where she remained for more than 2 decades. For the next 22 years, Deborah stayed in prison. She maintained she was innocent, and her supporters fought to expose problems with the case.
I had absolutely nothing to do with the brutal murder of my son, Christopher, and I did not give a confession to Mr. Soldat.
Over time, questions grew about the credibility of the key evidence, the detective's testimony. Later, it was revealed that Detective Armando Saldate Jr. had a long history of misconduct, including lying under oath, violating suspects' rights, and mishandling evidence in other cases. Many judges and lawyers came to question whether his testimony should ever be trusted. Legal teams argued that because the interrogation was not recorded, there was no way to know what Deborah actually said, and that Saldate's version could not be verified. They also pointed out that prosecutors had failed to share important information that could have helped Deborah's defense. In 2013, after 24 years in prison, a federal appeals court ruled that Deborah's constitutional rights had been violated, and her conviction was overturned.
Losing a child to murder is a devastating tragedy. Being falsely accused of a crime you didn't commit is also a devastating tragedy. Try to imagine that. What happened to me could happen to any one of you.
She was finally released from prison and walked free after more than 2 decades on death row. Unlike some others who are exonerated, there has been no widely reported official compensation from the state for Deborah's wrongful conviction. Deborah Mielke's case shows how dangerous it can be when a conviction depends on unrecorded interrogations and unreliable testimony, especially when there is no physical evidence. This is Clifford Williams. He spent 43 years in prison for crimes he did not commit in Jacksonville, Florida.
I just wanted to get out and be with my 6 kids. They was gone, and it wasn't nobody but them.
In 1979, a man was shot and killed and another was seriously wounded during an attack in Jacksonville. Police investigated the case but found no physical evidence, no fingerprints, and no DNA linking anyone to the crime. The only evidence came from eyewitnesses who said they saw Williams and his 18-year-old nephew, Nathan Myers, near the scene. Despite both men having strong alibis and other people who could confirm they were elsewhere, the police focused on them. The eyewitness testimony was the foundation of the case against them. Williams and Myers were charged with murder and attempted murder. During the trial, the eyewitnesses identified them in court. There was no DNA evidence, no weapon linked to them, no fingerprints, only the witnesses' statements. The jury convicted both men. Clifford Williams was sentenced to death, and Nathan Myers was sentenced to life in prison. 4 years, they lived with the consequences of a wrongful conviction. Williams spent decades under the threat of execution before his sentence was changed, but he remained in prison. Myers served his life sentence behind bars. Years later, innocence advocates, lawyers, and investigators began to re-examine the case. They looked closely at the ballistic evidence, the examination of bullets and shell casings that had been used at the original trial as proof the gun belonged to the attackers. When the ballistic evidence was reviewed with modern forensic standards, experts found that the evidence did not match the original testimony and did not connect Williams or Myers to the crime at all. In other words, the supposed link that had helped secure their convictions was incorrect. With this new information, lawyers filed motions to overturn the convictions. The court reviewed the case again and agreed that the evidence no longer supported the verdicts. After 43 years in prison, both Clifford Williams and Nathan Myers were finally exonerated and released.
Mr. Williams and Mr. Myers, the indictments have been dismissed against you. You are free to go, and we are adjourned.
The system that once failed them had been forced to correct itself, but only after decades of lost time, freedom, and family moments. To make up for the years they lost, each man was awarded $2 million in compensation from the state of Florida. Clifford Williams and Nathan Meyer's case shows how eyewitness identification can be wrong, how misleading or weak forensic evidence can lead to conviction, and how important it is to re-examine old cases to protect innocent people from spending their lives behind bars. This is Eric Kelly. He spent 24 years in prison for a robbery and murder he did not commit in Passaic County, New Jersey. Kelly was 28 years old when he was arrested after the killing of a video store employee. He had previously suffered a traumatic brain injury, which caused cognitive impairments and affected his ability to understand questions and respond during police questioning. Despite the fact that there was no physical evidence linking him to the crime, Eric was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. For over 2 decades, he remained behind bars for a crime he did not commit. Years later, advances in DNA testing allowed investigators to re-examine evidence from the crime scene. The results were clear. The DNA did not match Eric Kelly, proving he was not present during the robbery and murder. A new trial was granted, and prosecutors, faced with the updated evidence, dismissed all charges.
Therefore, in light of the foregoing reasons, the motion for a new trial is hereby granted.
Eric Kelly was finally released after nearly 25 years in prison.
Mainly, I want to eat. I'm a little hungry. My legal team, I want to thank them. I want to thank my family. Just want to get back to actually living for once.
To compensate for the years he lost, Kelly reportedly received $1 million from the state. Eric Kelly's story shows how wrongful convictions can happen, especially for people with cognitive or mental impairments, and how modern DNA testing can finally uncover the truth, restoring freedom to the innocent. This is Robert Springsteen. He spent 9 years in prison and was sentenced to death for crimes he did not commit in Austin, Texas. In 1991, 4 teenage girls were brutally murdered at a yogurt shop in Austin. The crime shocked the community, and police worked to find suspects. Among those considered was 17-year-old Robert Springsteen and 3 of his friends. At first, police questioned them, and then released them because there was not enough evidence to hold them.
This is one of the most significant things that ever happened in your life. That's what I keep trying to explain to you. If I was there and I partook in this, I would remember these things. And you do remember these things. No, I don't.
Years later, during a new police investigation, one of Springsteen's former friends changed his story and implicated Robert in the killings. Based mainly on this one statement, without any physical evidence linking him to the scene, Robert was arrested, charged, and eventually convicted of murder. At his trial, the prosecution used a friend's testimony as a key piece of evidence, even though there was no DNA or other proof tying Springsteen to the crime. The jury convicted him, and Springsteen was sentenced to death. He was sent to death row, where he stayed for years waiting for his execution. For nearly a decade, Springsteen remained in prison, fighting to prove that he was innocent. His legal team continued to challenge the case against him, arguing that the evidence was weak and that the trial had been unfair in several ways, including how witness statements were handled and how evidence was presented. Eventually, a judge agreed that serious mistakes had taken place during the original trial. Springsteen's conviction was overturned because the legal process used to convict him did not meet fair trial standards. This meant that a new trial or dismissal was required. In the years that followed, evidence from the original crime scene was tested again with modern DNA methods. The results showed no DNA linking Springsteen or any of the men accused to the murders. This helped confirm that the case against him was not supported by scientific evidence. With the DNA results and other concerns about the case, all charges against Robert Springsteen were dismissed, and he was finally released from prison after 9 years behind bars.
Second defendant, Robert Springsteen's case is being called this afternoon. Additionally, 4 pending capital murder indictments. The court has signed these dismissals in each of the causes against these 2 defendants, Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen.
However, because his conviction was overturned on procedural grounds, meaning the court found problems with how the trial was conducted, rather than an official finding that he was factually innocent, Springsteen was not eligible for state compensation. In most states, compensation is only available when a court declares someone to be actually innocent, not just when a conviction is overturned. Robert Springsteen's story shows how flawed investigations, unreliable testimony, and unfair trials can take away someone's freedom, even when there is no physical evidence tying them to a crime. It also highlights how important fair legal procedures and modern forensic science are in making sure justice is truly served. This is Curtis Flowers, who spent 23 years in prison and was sentenced to death for a quadruple murder he did not commit in Winona, Mississippi. In 1996, 4 people, the owner of a furniture store, Merle Evans, and 3 employees, were shot to death inside the store. There were no witnesses and no physical evidence linking Flowers to the crime. Police quickly focused on Curtis Flowers, and he was arrested and charged. Over the years, he faced 6 trials for the same murders. The first 2 convictions were overturned due to legal errors, and 3 trials ended in hung juries, meaning the jurors could not agree. In his 6th trial, Flowers was convicted and sentenced to death, even though the evidence against him was weak and mostly based on testimony that was inconsistent or unreliable. Throughout the trials, investigations later revealed that prosecutors had repeatedly excluded African American jurors from the jury pool. This racial discrimination meant the jury did not fairly represent the community, violating Flowers' constitutional rights. Curtis Flowers' case eventually reached the Supreme Court of the United States. In 2019, the court ruled that the jury selection process had been unconstitutional because prosecutors discriminated against black jurors. After more than 20 years in prison, Flowers was released on bail while the state considered whether to retry him. 1 year later, the state dropped all charges, finally clearing his name.
The only times that Mr. Flowers is allowed to be away from the location where he will be residing is if he's receiving medical treatment, attending meetings with his attorney.
The state of Mississippi later announced $500,000 in compensation for his wrongful imprisonment.
I don't know. I'm so excited right now. I can't thank you all very much. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Curtis Flowers' story highlights how racial discrimination, unfair trials, and repeated legal errors can ruin a life, and how the fight for justice can take decades, even when someone is innocent. If you want to hear more stories of people who were wrongfully convicted and later freed, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. You can also support efforts for justice reform by sharing this video.